Hello and welcome to another episode of the Best You interview series. It's Gary here again. Thank you very much, as always, for taking the time to tune in. And today I am joined by Michael Ostrolenk, who is here to discuss how to create more meaningful relationships by fostering deep connections with those around you. Since a very early age, Michael has been on a journey of self-discovery and mastery. And it all started when he discovered the power of meditation, guided imagery, and biofeedback. And these practices became his tools for managing internal states and overcoming life's challenges. This early fascination sparked a lifelong curiosity about human potential and the extraordinary capabilities that we all have. Michael is a licensed marriage and family therapist with a transpersonal specialization, diving deep into the mysteries of the human mind and spirit. He is trained in somatic psychology and earned his certification as a coach through NYU. For over 2 decades, Michael navigated the intricate world of national policy, tackling issues like national security, defence reform, cyber threats, Federal Reserve transparency, civil liberties, and foreign policy. Just all the easy ones, obviously. And he has been a fellow at the Centre for Cyber Influence Operations Studies and the Centre for Cognitive Liberty and Ethics, and has founded and led non-profits dedicated to making a positive impact in life. His adventures even included training as a personal protection specialist, mastering tactical skills, and delving into counter-terrorism. Wow. Michael, thank you very, very much for joining me today.
Yeah, thanks, Gary. I appreciate you having me on. Looking forward to this conversation.
Yeah, me too. Me too. So, as I mentioned there in the bio, your journey, your self-discovery journey started very, very early when you were 9 years old. How did this actually come about, and how have these practices informed your approach to helping you create more meaningful relationships in your life?
Yeah, no, I appreciate the question. So, 1979, I'm now 54 years old. So, it was 1979 when I was 9 years old.
Yeah.
And up until that point, I was having some difficulties in school. Like, I was a smart kid, but I'd be called lazy and dumb by some of my teachers because I'll excel at certain things and not excel in other things.
Right.
And lazy, dumb, all the stuff. But eventually, I got diagnosed with learning disabilities. So it wasn't that I wasn't trying. It's just my brain circuitry is organized differently than what they needed or expected from me. So leading up to that point, it's just there was a lot of pressure in school that I had a hard time handling. Add on to that some really big challenges health wise. I was in the hospital for a month as a little kid, autoimmune disorder. So between kind of the health challenges affecting my psychology, the learning challenges affecting my psychology, and some interpersonal stuff inside my family, I was just having a hard time of it. And the way it manifested was an obsessive compulsive disorder. I was a hair puller. That's kind of the way I dealt with my stress. And my mom took me to see a psychiatrist, figuring like maybe he could help me. And the funny story is I, at the end of the psychiatry session, I turned to her and I said, "He's fat, he smokes, he can't help himself. How's he going to help me?" And I walked out the room. And fortunately, I didn't get in major trouble. My mom somehow agreed with me.
Yeah.
And so, which is great because a psychiatrist in 1979 would just put me on medication, completely different life path. But she hooked me up with a therapist, Mrs. Pat Lawson. And Mrs. Lawson was cutting edge biofeedback. Consider it 1979. It wasn't as cool as it is now. But for a little kid, like if you relax, the balloon rises. When you get stressed, the balloon falls. That's the excitement of it. But that was cool. Guided imagery meditation got me to the martial arts. So she kind of helped set the stage for me realizing that, there's a lot of stress in my system, but I can learn how to manage it differently. I don't have to do an obsessive compulsive behavior. I can do breathing exercises. I can do biofeedback. I can do mantra work. All the various things she taught me helped me over time to learn how to manage my system.
Yeah, that's incredible. That's a lot for a kid to have to put up with. And thankfully your parents were, or your mum was certainly, diligent enough to say, this is beyond the realms of my parenting skills. We need some professional help here. Let's do that. And then agreeing with your assessment of, of the psychiatrist that you had gone to see. In hindsight, how much do you remember absorbing? Like, did this, when it was explained to you as you went through the therapy and got yourself to a better state, how much cognitively did you did you absorb and say, yes, I understand this, and if I do this, this will happen. If I don't do this, that will happen?
Yeah, so I kind of probably fell out of my mother in terms of my birth. Very curious, like
Right.
I'm sure if you asked my parents, they would have found me really annoying at various stages of my childhood because I'd just ask a million questions and never be satisfied with the answer I was given. So, I don't know that I know for sure I don't have the same language that I have now: self-mastery, self-management, nervous system regulation. That wasn't there. But I do know I was very interested in these things. And the interest is not only like, oh, this is really cool, this is helping me, but became more academic in nature in that the first 3 books I bought myself in 1979 were Zen Mind, No Mind by Daisetsu Suzuki, book on Zen, Zen and the Martial Arts, and then a book on yoga. And that also opened my eyes and ears and thoughts and heart to like, oh, there's these different spiritual paths.
Yeah.
Taoism, Buddhism, the Hindu philosophy, yoga philosophy. And that continued to expand my interest. So there was like a cognitive interest in all these things, like, oh, how does this actually work?
Yeah.
And, that interest actually even expanded even more because I remember I used to get the East-West Journal. It doesn't exist anymore, but this is, in the 80s. And it was like Eastern philosophy, Western psychology comes together. And so I'd study, like I'd read it from front to back, every one that came to me, and it's really exciting. And any books I could get on this topic growing up, I'd read as much as possible. Like I read Ram Dass, or probably listen to Ram Dass on audio, and Alan Watts, and all those things. So it was an academic or cognitive interest, not just like, oh, how can I manage myself?
Yeah. That's astonishing for someone so young to have the experiences, go through the experiences, and not just kind of like you alluded to there, just say, I need to navigate this for the betterment of myself, but a genuine interest into that to say, like, what is this? I need a little bit more, actually a lot more, it sounds like, that you have there.
Yeah, and it's great too because it kind of expressed itself in some of my friendships, like in my teenage years. Because I learned how to do guided imagery, I learned how to do meditation, so I'd actually teach some of my friends these things.
Yeah.
And actually, I would hypnotize some of my friends, like for better personality shifts, like they could be more relaxed and calm and confident, stuff like that. But ended up there was actually one good friend of mine that I work with. His father died as a result of napalm poisoning from the Vietnam War. And when I was doing the guided meditation with him, it brought up stuff, because he's less defended. And I'm like, dude, I'm not qualified to work with this. Like, I'm a kid. Like, what do I know? So for a little while, I'm like, oh, I'm not doing that anymore until I learn how to actually do it professionally. Because I don't like, that's not appropriate. But up until that point, I'm like, I was just kind of doing some of these things with my friends and walking through the process. I was a regular meditator. Like I would literally every day, I was training in the martial arts. I'd go to my basement. I'd turn on Enter the Dragon, watch Bruce Lee. I'd do my martial art training and then sit and meditate all the time too. It was good.
Fabulous. And it's so interesting when you mentioned yoga earlier, this is back in the 70s or 80s and yoga, fast forward, to 2025. And my son, Leo, he's 15 and he still thinks yoga's kind of funny. It's just for weird people that don't really have any social skills, or they're all, airy fairy. I don't know what he thinks. And him and I have embarked upon yoga, literally going outside to a class, not just doing it on our Peloton app, but doing it in a class. And I'm saying, I don't understand why you think this is weird. I understand you've got a peer group and all you guys are all hitting the gym, or, some of his friends are in the football team and all that kind of thing. But like, why you would think that there was one bad thing about yoga at all in terms of how it makes you feel physically, how it makes you feel mentally, before, during, and after, and the literal benefits that you can feel instantaneously from that. And he's still kind of, we're having this little, friendly tug of war about it. But even in this day and age, there's still a little bit of a movement of the yogis can stay over here. Us mainstreamers, we're the cool guys. We'll figure it out here. It's madness.
Well, I don't know if this is helpful, but something to think about. I spent about a decade working for Commander Mark Devine at SEALFIT. He created something called Kokoro Yoga, Kokoro Yoga. Right. So if your son needs to see a Navy SEAL, if he's interested in Navy SEALs, American Navy SEALs, doing yoga and how cool it is and great it is, that could be like the, oh, wait, if it's okay with those dudes to be doing yoga as part of their training, maybe it's okay. I don't know.
Yeah,
I got it.
maybe. Yeah, we have an interest here in David Goggins,
Oh, yeah.
the Navy SEAL, and actually Leo put me onto him, and I've been reading his autobiography recently, and then I said, like, did you know? And Leo recounts everything that he's done. So there's a certain element there. Maybe he's doing it just because he knows it irritates me a wee bit because he knows the benefits, and he's just saying, "Watch me wind my dad
Cheat
up."
buttons.
Yeah, press the buttons there. I don't know. I don't know. So, in terms of your career through the bio, there an incredible amount of exposure and experience that you've had in the variety of things that you've managed to do in your career. How do you find common ground through all of the diverse experiences that you've had to help you facilitate a deeper connection with yourself and understanding between other individuals and communities that you currently operate in?
So I would say that there's a mantra that's driven my whole life. That makes no sense. And because I would look at, even as a little kid, ways humans did things. I'm like, that makes no sense. That makes no sense. So I've always been driven to like, okay, that makes no sense. Why do people do that? And then I try to understand it psychologically and socio-psychologically or physiologically, whatever it is. Like, okay, but what's the possibility? Like, we do this over here, and it's like, as a little kid, I'd probably say that's dumb.
Yeah.
An adult, like, that's less effective and efficient towards the ends of your season. And I'd be like, but this is possible over here. So what's driven me is these two things. Like, I want to understand why people do these things, including myself. I do dumb stuff too. And like, but this is possible. How do we have more of this over here, which seems much more interesting and fun to try, and less of this? And that's one of the things that's kind of driven my whole career, trying to like understand those dynamics. And so like when I work with couples, so I work with individuals presently, 30 years as almost 30 years as a marriage and family therapist, 25 years or so as a coach. I stopped therapy. I started doing coaching in 2000 or so.
Yeah.
And I work with individuals, a very particular program. I work with couples, a very particular program, and I co-lead a men's group with a colleague and friend of mine, J.C. Glick. He's a former Army Ranger, called Resilience Optimized. And the theme is the same throughout. It's like I asked the question, like, how can humans be more resilient so they can not only survive in the world, but thrive in the world? Like, they can face adversity and it makes them stronger because there's plenty of adversity out there. It either crushes you or makes you stronger. Like, okay, let's make the good choices there. But it's not just resilience for resilience sake. Like, how do you also have resilient relationships? So my favorite framework is 2 as 1. Like, okay, it's great. You're a resilient human being. You're physically resilient. You're strong, emotionally, mentally, spiritually. That's wonderful, awesome. But you're also part of a collective or dynamic. Hopefully, maybe a marriage, if that's what your thing is. Cool. So how do you make those relationships more resilient to the challenges that we face in the world? And my thing is 2 as 1. How do you instead of facing each other and going, he's and she's and fighting each other and like who's right and who's wrong? It's like, how do you kind of come together in such a way that you can join and face the world together and take it on in the same way the individual would do in terms of survival to thriving? So that's the framework I use when I work with individuals and work with couples, and same with the men's group too. Like, in our men's group, we have 3 different areas we help our men deal with. Is like, how do you become more resilient in your own system? How do you learn to sit with your own life? Like, without, you're not going to porn, drugs, alcohol, working extra hard, working out extra hard. Like, sit in your own discomfort, your feelings, your thoughts, all the stuff, because then you can be resilient. And how do you sit with your partner? Let's just say a heterosexual couple. Like, your wife goes through these things, and how do you sit and hold the space for her and be there how she needs you to be? And we were talking offline, like, we kind of live in a VUCA environment, volatile, uncertain, chaotic, and ambiguous. Like, there's a lot going on technologically, culturally, geopolitically. It's like, we want our men to be able to step up and be leaders in their communities. That requires a strength, like physical strength and emotional strength and mental strength, but also big hearts too. So like that's kind of the framework that interpenetrates all my coaching work.
That's so fascinating and not surprising that you have that common theme through the variety of different types and styles of people or groups that you're interacting with, that there's a commonality, there's a sense of, yes, you need to be right first to be able to be as right as you possibly can be in your other relationships that have meaning to you. And that will mean different things for different people. It will mean different versions, probably, I imagine. I'm not putting words in your mouth here. When you're with different people, different people need different things from different people, and such. And it must be so rewarding to be able to, and so calming, I think, for the people that you're coaching and working with, to be able to say, you're not alone. This is very common, and there is a process that we can follow, that we've had major success over decades. Trust us, follow the process, experience your discomfort, be comfortable with your discomfort, and see where the journey can take you. That's powerful.
Yeah, I actually just hire you for my PR because that was well said. That was really good. Yeah. Yeah, and it's. I'll give you an example of a client that I'm working with. He is recently separated from his wife, and put him in a really challenging position emotionally and mentally, and everything was just turned upside down for him. And he put 100% heart into the work we're doing. Like, he did everything that I recommended to him to do. And I have a very integrated program, so we do things on the physiological, psychological, social, and environmental side. He ran with it all, and I'm so proud of him because what he ended up doing is losing 30 pounds.
Wow.
He's eating really healthily. He's training every day. He's showing up differently for his kids. They had kids together. He's showing up differently at work. He's much more front side focused, getting it done. He's connecting more deeply with his fellow employees because he's a manager at the manager level type of thing.
Yeah.
He's relating with much more clearer boundaries with his soon-to-be ex-wife. And he just started dating, and he's so much more clear now on, like, what I call red flags, green flags. Like what does he actually, first of all, what does he want in a relationship? And then what kind of partner does he want? And, like, hey, if those are too many red flags, maybe that's the right person for you. Cool.
Yeah.
And so he's just, like, transformed his life for the last 6 months. I'm like, oh, that is so awesome to see.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
Absolutely incredible. And as a coach, you don't often get, it's not always that you get experiences like that, that has this journey, especially in such a short space of time. So it's a great opportunity to share in the joy and the success from the growth that the individual has put in as well. That's a wonderful story.
And I'll say the same thing with couples too, because I love working with couples because it's so real. Like, if you and I were working together and you said, you start talking about your partner. Okay, I get your representation of who she is. Okay, cool. Yeah. But, like, both you in the room together or virtually, you can't hide, like, your facial expressions, your smile or not smile, you look away, your eye contact, how you adjust your body. I'm somatically oriented, so I pay attention to how people do things, including their breath. Yeah. Like, it's real. It's in the room. You can't hide your bullshit.
Yes.
And it gives us the opportunity to really do a deep dive into it. And if you so choose to do the work, to show up differently in your relationship with each other, which is awesome.
Yeah. And not an easy thing to do as well. I'm imagining a lot of these circumstances, especially when you have the two people in the room, can be supercharged, emotionally.
Yeah, no, very much. Which is a great point. So when I work with couples, I have kind of a 3-pillar approach to working with couples. The first piece of the first pillar is around agreements. Most people don't have conscious agreements. Like, how do we want to handle these particular subjects? And we talk about it. Most people just kind of come into a relationship. They have their family of origin programming, their religion, ethnicity, nationality, all these different things, media, and, like, that kind of guides some of their mostly unconscious behaviors. So we want to be conscious and create these agreements. But kind of to your point, if I'm if I make this agreement with my partner, like, this is how we're going to do things, and we're having a discussion around it, I get triggered. I get worked up, and my defense mechanisms kick in. Maybe I get aggressive. Maybe I withdraw. Whatever I do, she is going to say, "Oh, you're lying. You agreed to this, but you're not able to follow through on your commitment to it." So she's going to lose trust in you. So the second pillar is like, oh, how do I help each of the individuals within the couple work through their wounds, if you want to look at it that way, work through things that activate them or trigger them. Also, how to teach them how to self-regulate. So they are in the middle of a really crucial conversation. They start getting activated. There's a breathing pattern they can initiate, which calms their system down, or a mantra or a movement pattern that kind of calms their system down, allows them to engage more fully. All that's important. And then the third pillar is co-regulation. How can we regulate with each other to support our growth and development? So it's like, yeah, all that's important, but the individual work within that you have to do, or you're just going to be stuck in your old patterns.
Yeah. Do you know, it reminds me, and it's not even analogous at all. Just what you said reminded me of a slide I used to put up when I was teaching project management in class. And I would say, and really it was just, it was almost like a be kind to your project manager. And if you become a project manager, be kind to yourself. And it was just 4 bullets. It was super simple, Michael. And it said the project manager has to manage, number 1, the project. Number 2, the project management team. Number 3, the individuals on the team.
Yeah.
And then number 4, themselves.
Yes.
Each and every single day. Now, that might not be in the right order, of course. Now that we're talking about this, I probably could have flipped it.
Yeah.
But it was to try and evoke awareness, to say this is a lot for one individual human being to look after, and that's just their job. That's not their life. That's not, the reality that they're living in when they leave the office, virtual or otherwise. And it really brought home there, just that there are so many facets that you can sometimes preempt and certainly go in with a will and an intention to say, this is who I'm going to be, this is how I'm going to behave, this is what I would like you to do if you see me deviating, to, the actual realities of 3 things went wrong, 2 of them I'm annoyed about, 1 I haven't processed yet, that was late, I spilled coffee on myself and I'm supposed to be my best person. Give me a break. It's so, there's so much to it.
And I'll throw in some more complexity to it, because if you think about it, the individual that and the 4th one's the individual.
Yeah.
They actually have a multitude of parts in them, or a multitude of sub-personalities. So there's all these other things going on inside of themselves, these internal conflicts going on. So, they have to manage all of this.
Yeah.
And then other people in the project and stuff like that. And it leads me to say, this is what I imagine you're getting to, is grace and empathy or compassion.
Yeah.
For yourself, but also for your partner or your teammates or your workmates or whomever you're trying to deal with.
Yeah, and it's certainly not anything that I've ever been cognizant of that has been taught in school. It wasn't very prevalent to be taught in my circle as I was growing up in the west of Scotland. Be kind to yourself, be compassionate to yourself, understand that if you could do better, you would do better in an of a moment and such, and then building that up into adults, because the people I work with, or even just my friends and family circle for right now, everyone could do with a dose of, why don't you just lay off yourself just for a second here? Give yourself a bit of grace. You're not actually helping by beating yourself up. You're just bruising yourself. And what good is going to come from that? There's nothing. And it's not tough love, and it's not, this is the way that I get things done and this is my process. It's very counterproductive to anything that you could resonate with as progress.
Yeah, I mostly agree with that. And it's interesting because what I will have my clients do is notice the inner voices, the tone and the volume, and what the words that are actually used. And most of us, I can't speak for every human being, but it seems like my experience would suggest that most of us are native train loops. Like, with the way we speak to ourselves, the way we think about ourselves, the way we engage with other people. And it can be really helpful just to start noticing that. Holy moly, I'm beating myself up all the effing time, in my own head, or my children, or my wife, or whomever. We're engaging in certain things, and sometimes it can be really subtle. It could be the tone. I might be saying the right words, but my tone suggests something else. It's really interesting. Yeah, and compassion ourselves and other people.
It is, and I loved what you said there, Michael, just in terms of the tone and the volume. So it's not just the literal words, which sometimes you could kind of go, yeah, the words are fine. And it's maybe I'm just taking it the wrong way. And this is the internal dialogue, of course. But what way was it said? Was it sorry, or was it I'm sorry?
Yeah. That's perfect. That's a perfect example. And what it requires is for you as the person who said I'm sorry, or in a certain way or not, to be self-aware.
Yeah.
Because if you said something to me like I'm sorry, but you don't really mean it, you're kind of being sarcastic,
Yeah.
and I say something to you, but you're not self-aware enough, you're like, no, I was apologizing to you. What the hell your problem is, or whatever you might want to say to me.
Yeah.
You're gaslighting me. Like, wait, I heard one thing, you're saying another. I don't know who to trust. My own interpretation of what's going on, what you're
Yeah.
saying you meant to say. So it
Yeah.
requires your self-awareness and honesty. It requires my self-awareness and honesty, so you can really engage in a truthful conversation. So if I said to you, the way you just said that, I'm wondering about what your intention was. It didn't sound as if you're really apologizing. It sounded like you're kind of angry. And
Yeah.
you might be able to say, let me sit with that. Man, you're right. Yeah.
Yeah.
It wasn't a sincere apology. I'm still harboring anger in my heart. Let's talk about that. That's a whole different conversation than where that could have gone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It really is. And it reminds me of experiences. And I've been talking recently with various groups, people, and individuals that I deal with in terms of the experience. Like, you and I are having this conversation. We are hearing and saying the things that we're hearing and saying. We're having the experience at the exact same time, but our experience of this will be different.
Yeah.
So then if you think that you are, say, for example, back to the manager example, your client that you were talking about earlier, and his team are experiencing him differently now than they were 6 months and prior, every single individual has a different experience, and you can go kind of bamboozled by this if you start to overthink it. But if you think that, wait a second, I gave you the exact same information as I gave everyone else got it, and why didn't you get it? Then in some way you're judging, you're casting aspersions on that particular person, whether you say it blatantly or infer. You're the weak link. What happened here? Everyone else seems to be on page and you're not. And that's being very blinded to the fact
Mm.
that, you're closing yourself to a curious conversation to say, can you tell me more about that? Because everyone else seemed to get it. And I want to just make sure that you and I have a good plane of communication, that you get what you need.
That's a really nice way of doing it, as opposed to prescriptive and angry. And it comes to the point, like, we have to realize that everyone has different perceptual and interpretive equipment in their nervous system.
Yeah.
It's like from conception till that moment in time, these forces help organize their nervous system in such a way that they interpret things how they interpret it.
Yeah.
It's not good or bad. It's just the way they do. And you can see this in a lot of people who deal with trauma. Like, they've had a lot of trauma in their life.
Yeah.
They will definitely interpret things a lot differently than someone who hasn't, as one example.
Yeah.
Because I work with people, and I've watched a couple that I worked with years ago. And the wife, unfortunately, had dealt with a lot of trauma. And the husband was just talking to her at this nice pace, really calm, loving. Like, objectively, I'm like, this is like the nicest, loving human being in this situation. Like this is great. And she's like, why are you yelling at me?
Oh.
Objectively, you'd be like, whoa, like he's not, like, he literally would not raise his voice one iota. But because he disagreed with something that she was talking about, and she has this prism of trauma that triggers her nervous system, she takes everything as a threat, even the nicest fucking thing.
Yeah.
Wow. So, like, that needs to be, for her, she got help. So that needs to be dealt with. Yeah. Otherwise, they can't really communicate, because anything he does is going to be wrong in her interpretive system.
Yeah. And how do you see, in terms of relationship counsel, relationship coaching, how do you see couples get to a spot where they can, I don't know there's probably a better term for this, but where they can fight properly, where they can have those, they can be themselves. They don't have to be anyone else. They can express themselves in a way that's going to be palatable for them and palatable for the relationship. But they just haven't learned how to do that yet. And then there's point scoring and all the other negative things that go in relationships. Yeah. Like, how do you see, is there like a magic sauce that you can have for raising awareness to say, you're going to have to learn this because this is part of life?
So we talked about yoga earlier, and I like to use yoga as an analogy. Playfulness is a word I love.
Yeah.
And when I work with my couples, I say, ultimately, I want you both to be in a very playful place. Doesn't
Yeah.
mean life isn't hard and challenging and there's real things going on, but your attitude, your perspective, the way you handle things is like more of a playful, experimental, loving kind of place. Yoga. So like yoga, just on the physical side, I don't mean yoga for the intentional, like, so you can discover your Atman, so you can Brahman. I don't mean in the spiritual sense, but like flexibility. It's a great tool for flexibility in the physical body.
Yes.
And when I work with couples, it's not only an analogy, but it's actually literally.
Yeah.
They have to build in playfulness or more flexibility into their nervous system. Not only how they think, but how they feel, like, and their whole body. So I'm somatically trained, so there's a lot of work I'll do with literally the physical body. Because if not, we get rigid. We have these defense mechanisms, these defense structures, literally physical in nature as well as psychological. And they make sense why we have them. Real perceived threats when we're little kids, and we learn how to engage the world in a certain way. They served us once, probably don't serve us as an adult so well, because that's why we have these problems.
Yeah.
But how do you relax the system enough so it's much more flexible, playful? They're operating from their heart. They don't have to operate from fear and insecurities. Less so. We're always going to have stuff. But my intent is to get the individuals into that space. So when they come together, they can engage with each other, not through these patterns they bring into the relationship originally, but like this new kind of discovering this new playful approach to life, which then expresses itself in other areas of life too. But there's no magic bullet. It takes time to work the kinks out of the system and the rigidity out of the system. I mean, you're in Canada. Psilocybin, I think, is legal in Canada. MDMA, I don't think is legal, but like there are medicines, psychedelic medicines or pathogens in terms of MDMA, which, as one example, I'm transpersonally trained. So I study these tools that can affect consciousness in the body. There are some sacred medicines which can help loosen the system up and make it more likely to engage the world the way we're talking, or meditation or breath practices or yoga or sensory deprivation tanks. So that is my quick answer to a long process that doesn't just happen overnight.
I'll bet, absolutely. So in your roles at the Centre for Cyber Influence Operation Studies and the Centre for Cognitive Liberty and Ethics, what did you learn about barriers? Because barriers is ultimately like almost the undertone to everything that we've talked about thus far today. What did you learn about barriers to meaningful connection in today's vastly interconnected world?
That's really interesting. So the Center for Cognitive Liberty and Ethics was the early 2000s during Bush Jr.'s administration.
Okay.
And it was kind of prophetic, looking at the technology which was coming down the pike, which would have an effect on human beings. We're now living inside that whole system. Back then, it's more like, oh, this might be happening.
Yeah.
That technology will be used in certain ways to guide human behavior in certain directions.
Yeah.
It's nothing new. I mean, you look at television programming, but it's intended to guide you in certain directions to buy stuff you don't necessarily know you need until you watch the commercial and you're like, I need that thing to make myself feel better about myself, or whatever it happens to be, the magazines you read, the advertisements. It's no different. It's programming you to believe certain things, so you act in certain ways in the world, whether it's propaganda from your government or from Madison Avenue or whomever. Okay. What I learned in there is, like, historically, there have always been attempts to control people's thoughts and behaviors. The technology is improving to make it more likely and possible at the mass level.
Yeah.
But just as there's growing threats against that, there's greater opportunities to free oneself from those programs. I don't mean programs necessarily from like my childhood and my parents and stuff like that, but literally programs from the state or corporate world or whatever like that. And I can get into some of the things that I think would be useful for someone to start thinking about and doing to free themselves up from some of these programmings. But there are things we can do. So that's one thing I learned from Center for Cyber Influence Operations, for the Center for Cognitive Liberty and Ethics. The Center for Cyber Influence Operations Studies, which was about 6 years ago or so, much more ensconced in the reality of the technology we faced. And one of the things we study is, like, for instance, how Al Qaeda and ISIS recruit online, but also how, like, the Russians might use social media to influence the U.S. Like, hey, let's divide and conquer. I'm sure the U.S. does that in other countries as well. pick on the Russians against us. We all do it to each other at the government level. We try to influence each other. But like, wow, it's really interesting to see how successful these efforts on TikTok or Instagram or Twitter can be to divide people up and have them fighting each other.
Yeah.
Now, fortunately, here in the States, it has not led to a civil war. But, a couple hundred years ago, without the use of technology, we had a civil war. So, hopefully that never happens in our country. But you can see the partisanship getting worse and worse and worse. And you could imagine it leading to some kind of armed conflict down the road unless things get calmed down a lot. So it can be helpful for us to understand how actors, state and non-state actors, can use social media to influence us. Yeah, to buy crap on Instagram or Facebook. I do that all the time. I buy stuff. I buy shirts all the time on Instagram.
Yeah.
I'm influenced. But like, okay, maybe that's not the thing. The thing is like, how do we keep from being so influenced by what we're seeing on social media that leads us to things that we normally would not do? The way we treat our friends, our neighbors, our family members. To me, that's a much more important question to ask.
Yeah, and it sounds quite scary and also like a massive opportunity at the same time, the ability, and I think that's kind of where you were going with that, in terms of if used for good, this could be a genuine leveler for humanity to be able to understand each other better, coexist better, and just have a genuine human experience at a deeper level. If not used for good, then you're going to get what you're going to get. And I don't know that even the people who are maybe not using it for good today can even predict or understand what the actual end game is, other than, organized chaos, essentially.
Well, and one thing to consider too is most people think they're doing it for good, even if retrospectively we can go, oh my God, that was horrible.
Yeah.
Because I'm just thinking, I just finished reading a book about MK Ultra, which is the CIA's experiments in the 50s and 60s for mind control.
Right.
It is about the main character in the book was the guy who initiated some of these programs and ran them. Some of it was around using LSD for mind control and other psychedelics, and then hypnotherapy and all kinds of stuff. And you look back and go, oh my God, this is horrible, that the experiments we did with other human beings without their consent, including our own people, all that stuff. But the author made a really interesting point in the book. He's like, these people thought they're doing the right thing. They're fighting the Red Menace. The Soviets were like, we're going to get nuked tomorrow. They're going to invade our country. We need to do anything and everything to fight these guys.
Yeah.
Different, like retrospectively, it's easy to say, what you did was wrong. During that time, different role. My only point being, I think we should still have a much broader ethic, a world-centric ethic, but you also might want to understand that most people don't have nefarious intents with what they're doing.
Yeah.
Now, it doesn't mean, I'm sure there are people with nefarious intents what they're trying to do, but they think they're doing the right thing most of the time.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. I was made aware of some kind of child psychology at work over the last little while here, and it's exactly the same sentiment. If the kid could do better, they would do better. And then when I was chatting about that, I said, isn't the same true for everyone? If someone could do better, they would do better, unless there was a different intent, unless there was an intent to, in some way, sabotage, prove a point, make a show, like whatever it looks like. But in general terms, in human dynamics, if you're doing the best you can with what you have at that particular moment in time.
I'd love to speak to that too, if you don't mind.
Definitely.
Okay, so it's interesting because when I, especially as a therapist, when I work with as a coach too, I'll have clients who kind of do a deep dive into their family of origin. Like, oh, my mom did this, my dad did this, and it set me on this certain path.
Yeah.
And what I would always, I don't say this to them in the moment because you got to meet people where they're at, but broader pictures, like there are stages along the path. One of the stages is, yes, get really pissed at whoever the person was who did that thing that you think screwed you and they victimize you. Yeah, it's really important to feel the anger and recognize the boundaries that were violated and be really, whatever you need to do to get on the other side of that. But you don't want to get stuck there.
Yeah.
Because then you're just running that loop, which is not going to be productive for you in the long run. Eventually you get to the point, mostly, not all the time, some people get stuck in that loop of they did the best they could.
Yeah.
With what they knew. And they probably did the same thing that their parents did, which they did the same thing as their parents did. Just kind of continued on certain behaviors down the lineage. And you can get to that point, you're like, oh, cool. All right, I was mad at them or her or him, and now I understand where that came from, and I can choose to forgive them. I can choose to let it go. I can choose not to be reactive to it. It takes some time to get there, but it's back to the compassion thing that you talked about earlier.
Yeah.
Compassion of yourself, compassion of this other person. Does that mean that that what they did was right? Maybe not. So you can still have that moral arguments inside your head. Yeah, maybe it was so bad they should have gone to prison. Okay, I'm not saying it's not. But if you carry that inside yourself, like a lot of anger and hate and vitriol, you're poisoning yourself. They're most likely dead already. They don't really care, or they're whatever they got going on. You're carrying the poison inside yourself at that point.
Yeah, definitely. I'd said to someone recently, if people's problems were genuine literal weights, other people's problems were genuine literal weights, you would see almost everyone hunched over, struggling to walk down the street because of the amount of onboarding that you do of other people's problems. And why would you want to do that to yourself? Because you have your own problems. Are you offloading them to someone else? No, you're not. You're trying to keep in hold and manage them. And at the same time, you've got all this stuff attached to you, and you're kind of like, I can hardly breathe and I can't walk. And that's why I can't go anywhere. But because it's invisible and because there is no literal weight to it, you only see the actual weight through behaviors that are unbecoming of that particular person, or certainly unusual for that person, and destruction and breakdowns and such. And it's certainly food for thought to have that compassion, to say, I wonder what's going on, rather than the reaction that we would typically have of, really, are we going to go? Let's go then, and I'm going to be bubble there as well. So yeah, I love it. So this is, as you know, it's been such a fascinating conversation. This is the Best You, a podcast to give people an opportunity to think about things that they could do that would give them the opportunity to be the best version of themselves. What's one regular practice that you employ that gives you the best opportunity to be the best version of yourself?
Yeah, gratitude. I have a daily gratitude practice. I've actually updated it recently, but I have a daily gratitude practice. I always have all my clients do a gratitude practice. And there's 2 parts to it. The first part is like at least 3 things you're grateful for when you first wake up in the morning. Acknowledge. It literally could be like, I woke up. God granted me the grace to wake up this morning. That's awesome. Or whatever the things are, at least 3 that you can think of. And even if you're having the worst hour, week, month, year of your life, there's always something to be grateful for. Yeah. And that just changes the internal dynamic. But the second part of that too is if it's someone you're grateful for, like, my teacher when I was in 3rd grade, or my father when I was 6, or my best friend 3 weeks ago, or my wife 5 minutes ago, tell them.
Yes.
Literally, if you can call them, if you can text them, and you can however you need to reach out to them, because most people just hear bad stuff. Bad news. I mean, if you watch the news, it's all bad news. But there's not a lot of positivity floating around in our culture.
Yeah.
And it can be really powerful for someone to reach out to you and say, hey, man, Gary, thank you so much for what you did yesterday. It really meant a lot. Whatever the thing was. It really set my mind right, or really opened my heart, or whatever the thing was.
Yeah.
So not only is it good for me to acknowledge, to be grateful, but I could imagine if I called you up and said, Gary, man, thank you for having me on your show. It really meant a lot. I loved our conversation, and let them into a little bit more detail than that. That if you're having a bad day, at least for 5 more minutes after that moment, you'd be like, oh, that's cool. He really enjoyed our conversation. I felt, I was a good host, and I asked really good questions, and so it could shift your mood and your state. And then you never know, it gets paid forward. Like maybe you engage your son a little bit differently, or your wife, or a workmate, because someone showed you gratitude. So ripple effect, a beautiful thing.
So powerful. I did an exercise in my leadership and management classes, very, very similar. Yeah. I would just say, tell me a leader you admire and why. And invariably, if I have, say, for example, 30 students in the class, 60% at least would say a family member or someone in their circle And the why part was the real fascination. My uncle, and really because he was the guy when my dad was working, he taught me how to fish and how to play and how to, whatever it is. And I would do that very simple thing that you just said. Have you told him? A very small percentage said yes.
Yeah.
And the majority of them were kind of like, well, no, he knows. Like we've got a really good relationship. I says, that's different. That's great. Mm-hmm. But have you specifically said, listen, I am grateful for this particular thing that you did at that particular time that made me feel this particular way. Yeah. You have no idea the impact it's had on me. Bravo. Thank you very much. It feels good saying that to people. It feels fantastic hearing that.
Yeah.
What's not to love?
And at the worst level, you never know, it could literally save someone's life. Like
literally.
You just never know. Someone could be literally suicidal, and they get that text, they get the call, whatever it is from you, and such gratitude, and maybe they make a different decision.
Yeah, definitely.
And it doesn't have to be that extreme, but it definitely will have a positive benefit in a moment in their life, which is nice.
Absolutely. Okay. Incredible. So before I let you go, Michael, where can people find out more about you?
Okay, so all over social media, M Ostrolenk, Mostrolenk on Twitter, on Instagram. You can find me on Facebook, Michael David Ostrolenk. You can find me on LinkedIn, Michael David Ostrolenk as well. And then my actual website, Michael D. Ostrolenk, OSTROLENK.com. Talks about my individual work and my work with couples. There's a link to the men's group there. Yeah, and if you want to have a discovery call and see if I'm a good fit for what you're working on, feel free to reach out.
Fabulous. Thanks again, Michael, for the time. I've absolutely loved this conversation today.
Appreciate you, man.
Hello again. Thanks again for tuning in to this episode, and I do hope that you found it valuable and gained some insights. I do have an ask for you. If you enjoyed this podcast, I would absolutely love it if you would connect with me on my socials, and that's at LinkedIn, Facebook, and YouTube. Just search for my name and do whatever it is you need to do there to follow me and stay updated with all the latest content, tips, and discussions. And for any more resources that you're looking for, feel free to visit my website, garygillen.com. And while you're there, you can book a free, no obligation 30-minute coaching call directly with me through the site. Whether you're looking to enhance your performance or tackle a new challenge, I'm absolutely here to help you succeed, and I would absolutely love to hear from you. Thanks very much again, and until next time, keep pushing towards your goals and getting better each and every day, my friend.